Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Transformation for Increased Engagement. If you have a content question during today's webinar, please post it in the Q&A section of your control panel. As questions are asked, anyone can upvote a question to let us know that more than one person is interested in hearing the answer. We will be monitoring the questions throughout the webinar, and there will be time to answer as many as we can at the end. You will receive a follow-up email on Thursday with a link to today's recording if you would like to listen again or share it with colleagues. Also included will be a short feedback survey. We would really appreciate it if you would please take a few brief moments to share your feedback on today's webinar. Now I will turn it over to your co-host for today's webinar, Nathan Artt of Ministry Solutions, who will introduce today's very special guest speaker.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan. Very, very excited to be with all of you today, and just thank you for taking some time out. For those of you who know, actually had an opportunity to write a very short book on the impact of, essentially the impact of the digital age on church and the way that we do church and be the church. And it just so turned out that one of my favorite case studies and leadership studies in the book turns out to go to the same church I do, which is so that was just an amazing opportunity, and had an opportunity to connect with you, Frank. So first of all, thank you so much for being here with us today. It means a lot.
Well, it's a privilege. I'm thrilled to be here, Nathan. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I want to, just before we get started, I want to kind of just give the audience a little bit of an understanding of why we are so excited about this conversation. And I've said this to you, Frank, but I really believe with all my heart that the case study on Home Depot and Home Depot under your leadership is probably the most relevant case study that we have in church today. And the reason I say that is you have a very illustrious background before Home Depot, but you joined the company in 2002, became the CEO in 2007, right as the Great Recession was hitting. You inherited somewhat of a disgruntled corporate culture, and you had to lead through the recession, changing culture while also dealing with the impact of the digital marketplace on Home Depot's business. And, Frank, that's very much where we're finding ourselves in a very similar situation, going through this global pandemic. But also, we believe that COVID hasn't necessarily changed anything as much as it has accelerated a change that was already happening. And you had an opportunity to be a part of that and led Home Depot to being the fourth largest online retailer in the country. So I'd love to just kind of start off and hand it back to you. Take us back a little bit to 2007. What was going through your mind as you take on this new position with all those challenges, and still somehow 8 years later, Home Depot's where they are?
Yeah. So first off, thank you again for this opportunity, and I'll apologize in advance because you all are in a very different world than I, and I'll make my world is retail. There are similarities that I see between the connection point of bricks and mortar retail with online, and bricks and mortar churches and online. But I also know it's retail, not church. And so there are obviously some important and huge differences. In terms of Home Depot and my experience as a CEO, just very briefly, first, I was never expecting to be the CEO. If you had asked me a nanosecond before the board called whether I was ever going to be the CEO of Home Depot, it wasn't in my thought process, not even something, driving along late at night with the rain, what would I do if I were running this place? Just never had occurred to me. But obviously, I became the CEO. The board called, offered me the job. I said, you need to think about this. You need to get somebody with more experience than I. They still gave me the job after thinking about it for a while. And just as you said, Nathan, so this was January 2007. The housing crisis had really started in the sort of towards the end of the third and certainly into the fourth quarter of 2006. So by 2007, we knew there was a housing crisis. So Home Depot is a very housing related company. And then on top of that, the Great Recession hit. So we spent the first 3 years of my time as CEO really in very difficult economic circumstances, sales declining and all the rest. And then add to that, as you say, we had just culturally, things weren't working well at Depot. We were losing market share. And so there were a lot of other things to fix in addition to just the sales being a problem. I'll tell one sort of funny story on this. So when I am named CEO, my son happened to be a store manager at Home Depot because we had a program, still have a program of returning military veterans coming and being able to get jobs in the store. And my son had served in Iraq and he had come back and was assistant store manager and a store manager. And he was a store manager. I gave him a call and I said, hey, I'm the new CEO of Home Depot. And he laughed. And I said, no, that's real. I'm going to be the new CEO. And he said, good luck, Dad. And I said, well, what do you have as advice for me? You know, retail, if you ever go into Home Depot, you know, there's a break room in the back where the associates, employees go on their break. And the company tries to beam in a message with a little TV and the associates try to figure out how to turn it off. Common in all of retail, but we're beaming in our message and I'm supposed to go and talk to, at the time, 350,000 associates, truly not having thought of what should I be saying? What's the right message? So I asked my son if he had any suggestions and he said, well, I can tell you how I start my weekly meeting in my store. And I start by reading this book called Built from Scratch, which is a great story of the entrepreneurial founding of Home Depot. He said, I read from that and that sort of sets the tone for the week. So I said, that's a great idea. I pick up the book, I flip madly through it to find something that would be appropriate. And what I come on is what we call the inverted pyramid, where the boss is at the bottom, the store associates and the customers are at the top. And I said, that sounds like a good message, really not having thought about it much. But that was the first thing I talked about. And then I spent 8 years as a CEO trying to figure out what does that really mean to try to lead an organization from the perspective of an inverted pyramid. Fascinating. I learned a lot. It's, I think it happens to be one of the most profound leadership concepts out there. Not what we're talking about today, but
that's
that
great.
was 2007.
Well, but that has everything, I think. I mean, because that's one of the things right now. The digital isn't just disrupting the way we meet our congregations, but our staffs as well. I mean, we're going through major reorganizations and looking at reprioritizing. And, you know, I mean, I'd love to hear more about that actually, because I think that's one of the things that our leaders on this call are dealing with is how to lead their staffs when roles have somewhat dissipated and we're just having to plug in and adapt. So I think it's very relevant.
All right, I'll give you this is really quick. I'll give you my 2-minute overview of what I learned on an inverted pyramid in servant leadership. The first is, and I wish we had the graphic of the inverted pyramid because the most obvious point is, as a leader, it is a weight-bearing position. You're at the bottom of this organization, you're supporting the organization that's above you, and as a weight-bearing position, it underscores the need for integrity and unity of purpose, that if you're trying to do two things, if you're kind of self-dealing on the side, or there's something, there you go. That's the inverted pyramid. Well done. If you're doing that, you'll cause fractures, and that will hurt the entire organization. So underscores integrity. The second thing is when you look at the visual, you realize that as you move up in an organization, as you become more significant, it's harder work. Everything's uphill. People have this notion that when they're the boss or the leader, stuff cascades down through an organization. It's the single worst visual analogy ever made. Nothing cascades down in an organization. Gravity is not your friend. You are trying to move messages up through an organization, which means you have to focus on communication, on very clear messages. You have to focus on listening to the people above you in the pyramid. In the retail world, your frontline associates and your customers. In the church world, I assume your congregants. And you have to move this whole organization in effect by osmosis and show what it is that you expect. And as I say, I'm truncating this very quickly, but the biggest thing I learned was in business, there's a phrase that you get what you measure. Everybody in business knows that. You get what you measure. We have all kinds of measurement systems. I would add an equally important corollary. You get what you celebrate. You tell me what a business celebrates. You tell me how, in a virtual or literal way, they bring their employees up on the stage and say, this is what we expect. And I will tell you, that's what the organization will deliver. Everybody looks to the leader of the organization to set what is that pattern and practice that we are all aspiring to. And it stuns me how many organizations, and probably, I don't know, but I'm guessing this might apply to church organizations, how many organizations are not intentional about the way they celebrate and recognize the people who work in the organization, or for that matter, the congregants, because it's one of the single most important things you do as a leader. That's my 2-minute inverted pyramid talk.
I'm sure there's a couple hours worth of content.
Yeah, there's a lot. It was 8 years of tough learning.
Well, and there is a direct correlation. I mean, for the church world, it would go to congregants to volunteers, which is that first level of engagement, is people who are on the front lines actually serving the people who are coming, whether digitally or physically, every Sunday. So no, direct correlation. Yeah. It's interesting because we're going to talk about data later and like what the role is and the purpose, but we've said the same thing. Data is really used to identify stories, and what gets celebrated grows. So
exactly.
Love hearing that.
And also when you put the pyramid around, the listening aspect becomes critical, because everything that's important, is really happening above you. And how do you listen to that? How do you know? And one of the things that we can now have in our age is much better data about what people are actually thinking, what they're worried about, how we can better serve them. And that is a core part of your listening obligation as a servant leader.
Wow, this wasn't planned, but listen, this is a touchy subject in our space, is the role and the use of data. And here's
why is that?
Well, I'll give you some feedback. A lot of times when we introduce the idea of data, we hear that we're turning our congregants into numbers and statistics, that we are kind of in a way dehumanizing or despiritualizing and we've said this for a long time, but it's really what data does is it helps you identify stories and form the questions that inform your decisions. But it's actually about getting to know people. But I would love to hear you talk, because at the end of the day, retail is very similar in that you are building relationships with consumers who are looking for something specific, right, that benefits them. They could shop somewhere else. So I'd love to hear about your look, how you look at data, its role, and how it might benefit the churches who are listening here.
Well, I mean, I guess the first comment would be data is neutral. So if the purpose of collecting the data is to manipulate people, and have them, if there's a nefarious purpose on collecting the data, then, okay, it's not the collection of the data that's the problem, it's what's your purpose. What should be your purpose? This is true for retail, it's gotta be even more true for a church organization. It should be that the purpose of getting the data is it allows you to listen better to what your congregants are saying and allows you to serve them better. That's the purpose of collecting the data. And again, when you flip the pyramid and look at the importance of trying to listen to what's happening above you. I don't know how you, I mean, if you have any kind of size congregation, I don't know how you do that effectively without gathering data. And the data, it should be, certainly it's this way in retail. I would think it would be true also in the church world. People actually want you, if they trust you for what you're doing for them, they actually want you to understand their needs better.
Amen.
And often, they don't, often they don't necessarily want to reach out and describe their needs to you, but they're not upset that you know their needs. They're not upset that gee, I mean, I've just taken an easy example. If we gather data on our congregants, we know that we have X% that are elderly and in nursing homes, for the sake of discussion. Mm-hmm. That allows a formulation of a service that you might not have intuited, that you had so many, I'm just making this up, obviously, but I might not have intuited as a leader of the church that I had so many people in a nursing home. That leads me to behave differently because I know I've got a different need set that I have to reach. There are a million examples like that. In retail, that's sort of the core of, I want to provide my customers are going to come back because I'm providing a great product at a great value and great service, but I want to understand what their needs are.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things about this conversation that got me very excited. Okay. So when I started doing the research on the digital impact on retail, which again, I do see corollaries just because we're dealing with human beings and behaviors. And it was just amazing to me. I looked at Home Depot predominantly, but also Target, Walmart, and Macy's. And in the past 10 years, all four companies have moved from being a website driven, having a website to drive foot traffic to having a digital presence of some kind. All four are now in the top 10 largest online retailers in the country. But here's what's mind blowing to me. Not a single one of those four companies sees more than 10% of their revenue from online sales. Home Depot, 2016, you guys were awarded the Digital Transformation Award. That year, only 5% of your total revenue came from online sales. So there's this thing I would love to hear more about, but in 8 years, you go from a website driven to foot traffic, or a website driving foot traffic, to having a 400 to 500% increase in in-store sales based on a digital footprint. That's unbelievable that instead of it being either or, that you actually use this thing to drive physical engagement. I would love for you to just unpack that for us. It's amazing.
So Nathan, you're exactly right. It is not one or the other. It's actually how they combine together for the strongest offering that in the retail's case, that the customer wants. And I'll give you a simple example of the power of why digital is so important. So if you're a retailer, and if I go back 15 years, and some of the folks who are listening may, this may connect with them. You get your newspaper on the weekend, and in your newspaper in the weekend, there'd be what were advertising inserts from Home Depot and lots of other retailers. They'd spill out in your newspaper. And then you'd look through and we'd put an insert in, many pages. I mean, that was the dominant marketing spend, many pages. Now, think about this for a second. Imagine you're sitting in your home and you got a leaky faucet and you need to replace your faucet. I want, as the retailer, I want to put my faucets in front of you that I happen to have and that can satisfy your need. But maybe for that week, I didn't put faucets in my circular. Or if I did put faucets in my circular, I didn't put the faucets that really gathered your attention, that struck you as the right faucets. Now, that was 15 years ago. Random completely random, whether that connected with your need, your want at the time, completely random. Now, you need a new faucet. What do? You go, I hope, you go to homedepot.com. Don't go to any of those other folks. You go to homedepot.com and you have access. You see every single faucet we have. You know all the faucets we have. You know their price, you know their functionality. You get reviews of the other people who bought that same faucet. An incredible amount of very specific knowledge to your need. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to make comments on how the church world thinks about its communication. In effect, I don't want to call it a marketing spend because that sounds negative, but how it communicates with its congregants. But to me, it's the same fundamental principle. I've got some congregant out there who's got some sort of problem. Again, just for an example, they're depressed or they're grieving or whatever it is. Wouldn't I want, as a church, wouldn't I want to be displaying to that congregant, here's what we can do for you? We have all these different abilities, things that can bring you closer to God, things that can bring you some relief from whatever it is you're going through now. Wouldn't I want the most effective way of presenting that to my congregants that's possible? I go, if a retailer thinks that way about faucets, I would think surely a church must be thinking that way about much more profound and important needs.
Well, you would think, and candidly, I don't want to put every church into a box, but I think that's the conversation we're struggling with. And this is my opinion. I'll opine a little bit here, but the church, most of the feedback we hear about the digital platform is we're terrified of what it does to physical attendance. To physical attendance, to corporate worship, to coming on Sunday. And we're thinking, and when here's the biggest thing I want for people to hear from you, honestly, is we talk about the digital platform as though it is synonymous with watching service online, right? The reality is a digital experience is very, very different because, I want to set you up for this a little bit. So our friends at PushPay came out with a resource and really liked what they said. But the author said, it used to be that attendance was so important because attendance would drive engagement. You come in, we have a next steps class, and we'll tell you about how you can get baptized or get plugged into a group. But what the digital platform has done is now people have to engage before they'll attend. So we're in the living room now of millions and millions and millions of people, more than we ever have been before. And because of COVID, weekend activities are limited, our competition's limited, and we're still trying to pack all of our communication into one 60-minute window. Home Depot has never tried to sell me a woman's vanity, right? I mostly get tools and other things. But we're announcing everything all at once to this one audience as though it's actually one audience, when in reality, it's a very segmented audience that we don't segment. So that's a lot of information, and I apologize, but I feel like if I had to sum it up, I would say this. I would say that the church has to change its win. Right now, we're talking about attendance. How many people view online? Very little talk about engagement. How we're translating people who consume online. How do we move them into salvation, baptism, community group, service opportunities, and giving? So that's a lot of information, Frank.
No, I think that is, I happen to believe that is profoundly important and absolutely true. And it mirrors what I hope is that it just is a reflection of where the church is on its path, because it mirrors where retail was on its path of understanding digital a decade ago. Okay. So the first efforts that a lot of retailers did with digital was they would just take that circular I was talking about, because they realized no one was reading the Sunday paper anymore, and and they digitized it. It was no different than the thing that went out in the newspaper, only it was digital. And just as you said, Nathan, the way we thought about it was how many people were on our page, how many people visited the page and saw the static images. Well, I mean, really, hopefully it won't take very long for the church to move beyond that, because that's where retail was.
Wow.
Because pretty soon into it, you realize, well, wait a minute, no, we've got to be measuring engagement. We want to know what they click on. We want to provide an experience that connects well with our store, that is where they are. So, the other big thing, one of the things that data shows is how people engage. Are they on their mobile phone? Are they on a laptop? Are they on an iPad? What's the best experience? How do you make that an experience that people just, they want more of it, and it leads them to the brick and mortar store? If that's what works, it leads them to deeper interactions with groups. I mean, digital is the perfect platform for groups to form of common interest. And the capabilities are truly explosive. If all you're doing is taking a sermon I'm going to assume is a great sermon, and digitizing the sermon, that's not a huge advance over TV. I mean, you're just getting a different mode of television, and television is notoriously unresponsive. You can't do anything with your TV. You just, throw boots at it. It doesn't respond. So I would hope that that's just a moment of time, and then people, there are people who are just going to show the path to, no, this is about connecting. It's about experience. It's about
significance.
Right.
Yeah. It's about giving people a role in their story of this inspired, most beautiful story of all time. And we're
and people are so thirsty for it.
Yeah. And that's that is the thing that it's amazing to me. I think high level on this, but the Lord allows, I'm not saying he caused, but the Lord allows this huge disruption to happen. And all of a sudden we have people all over the world locked in their homes. There's no more weekend activities competing, and everyone is sitting in isolation considering who am I, why do I exist, and who loves me? Identity, purpose, and significance. And it's similar to the Gutenberg press that we're now in the living room. And I'm amazed that the only question I hear is, when do we go back? And it's almost like we're asking, when do we go backwards? We have this opportunity, though, to create a higher level of engagement than we've ever had. But I agree with you. I think it's more than just watching a sermon online. That's somebody really smart once said, we could possibly be training people in the irrelevance of going to church.
But what I would say is the opportunity. So yeah. I'm a believer in brick and mortar retail. Yeah. My view at Home Depot was not, we developed the internet and the internet's going to supplant our store. And just as you were saying, Nathan, we never thought that, and it isn't what happens. In a way, it makes the store more important. It is a way to enrich the experience of the store. I remember I had one of the best conversations. This is a little bit of a.
Oh, this is where I want to park. This is great.
But I have a cousin who is, he's a small contractor, and he delighted in telling me all the ways that Home Depot disappointed. I mean, that was, anytime I go home for Christmas, I just knew I would get an hour from my cousin on how hopeless we were. And then we got to a Christmas where he said, you guys are actually now, I gotta say, it's actually kind of helpful. And I said, what brought this about, Colin? And he said, well, I can find out online on my mobile phone, I can find the inventory position you have on the products that I want. So I don't need to go into the store and be disappointed. I know what you got. And he said, for that alone, you have dramatically improved my life. And that's, I mean, I don't know what the analogy is, but it's that how do I connect with the need in the most effective way that gets people going, wow, that was amazing. I mean, I think I mentioned this to you, Nathan. It's always amazed me, not always. It has recently amazed me that churches haven't done what, if I were in your shoes, would be the most obvious thing to do.
Okay.
So the most obvious thing to do, the most brilliant, one of the brilliant parts of digital is that it's a platform. And it's a platform that lends itself to people communicating to each other in very meaningful ways. And, you know, you get companies like Facebook that have made billions and billions and billions of dollars on it. If I'm in a congregation, and this is true of every congregation I've ever been in, and I would say I grew up an Episcopalian, which means I rarely ever talked to anybody in the church I went to. I mean, it was a happy day if I knew people who I'd see for 10 years and I actually knew their name. With a digital world, why don't I know what the needs are of my community of faith?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean the charity down the, you know, that's helping the poor people someplace. It's why don't I know, here are the people who could really, you know, would benefit from a helping hand, who might be out of work and looking for a job, or might have been sick and need some help, daycare help. Why isn't the most natural, nurturing platform available one that a church can make available to digital? I don't know. There may be an answer to that, but it surprises me. It surprises me that it hasn't happened.
Yeah, me too, to be honest. One of the things that surprised me as a company, we'll get donor reports and we'll spread a heat map and we'll show. So one of the things that Amazon did in the digital retail space is basically they eliminated borders, right? Okay. Now I want to hang on to what you said about why that actually makes the store more significant, because that's the struggle there. But it's amazing because city churches are, becoming larger, regional churches, the impact's grown. And it's amazing. You'll do heat maps and you'll see where new people are coming from. You'll have a pocket of like 30 people in this area that you were never in before. And we're doing nothing to actually connect those 30 people, right, together, to let them know that there's 29 other people that are also watching on Sunday morning. But there's a lot of things that we can do. We just don't ask, right? But I do want to go back, because the heartburn, and I don't know if I'm just living in a microcosm, but writing the book and doing some other webinars, the number one piece of feedback is that the digital platform is diluting corporate worship and it is replacing it. And our argument has always been that it's really an enhancement to it. But you said that, and you said that the digital platform made the in-store experience more important for a group of people, mostly, not everybody, thinking in an either-or mindset. How did you, from internally with your staff to customers, create almost an agnostic view to between the two experiences, and why does digital make physical in-store retail more special?
Well, so I would, so that I don't go too far down the rabbit hole of retail, I would say the first question I'd start with, because it's a question we start with for a retail business. Am I just siphoning off business from my stores, which, by the way, I've got a lot of sunk costs in those assets. So I'm a little anxious if that's what I'm doing. And it didn't work out that way. Why didn't it work out that way? Because if you spend some time and you put down, what do people expect? What's the experience they're looking for? Part of the experience they're looking for is, that physical experience of going into a store, interacting, with products, seeing the product, touching and feeling. I mean, I can go through all the lists of things that still gets people to physical stores and made us very comfortable with the fact that, hey, the more we engage people digitally and show them what we have and show them the alternatives, all we're doing is expanding opportunities, not contracting opportunities. And that actually 110% was true. I imagine in the church world, and this is imagination, and again, forgive me because I don't know your world, but if somebody said, what do we have to offer to our congregants? And if the answer to that question is a sermon, then you're in trouble. because if that's all you've got to offer, then yes, that's true. You know, put it digitally. I sit on my couch on Sunday morning, I watch it, I'm done. This was the extent of engagement that the church wanted, expected, and was happy to achieve. Then you've got a lot of sunk costs in buildings that, you know, aren't that important. But I would hope that when you put down on all the lists of the things you have to offer, that that's a fraction of what you have to offer. And just like a retail brick and mortar, there is something about the physical presence. There is as great as everybody is, you know, the online connections and all the rest, you know, Home Depot, if you look during the pandemic, has, you know, had more foot traffic than ever. People still want to be with people. I gotta think, people of faith want to be with people of faith. You want to be doing something with your children. You've got opportunities. I mean, again, I'm sure the list is extensive of what a church actually has to offer. Just like a store, the list is extensive, and you connect them, and it's growth, not contraction.
Oh, I love everything. I love all of that. And you said a few times that the retail experience is, I mean, you're actually speaking directly to everything I think that we're all struggling with right now in the space. I want to bring up a story that I experienced with Home Depot, ironically, around the time that I was writing the book. And at first, when it first got to me, I couldn't figure it out, but I bought a house a few months ago, moved, my kid got into Woodward, which is south of Atlanta, so had to move, and you know, project after project. So I go to Home Depot, and the first thing I notice is every time I swipe my credit card, it automatically knows my email address, good for you. And so I expected to get an email. I wasn't expecting the email I got. You know, a lot of retailers will send you, you know, sales coming this week or something to try to just directly get you back into the store. But I think because of what I bought, I bought I bought a chandelier, ceiling fan, just doing some of that stuff, right? The email I got was a DIY video. And for whatever reason, it just really set with me. And I processed that just in the lens of what I was writing for the church. But it's like, wow. The idea isn't, hey, come buy something and be a part of what we're doing. We exist to make you a better DIYer.
Exactly. Right.
And you know what it did? And by the way, I have to applaud Home Depot. You know, the guy in the video is, you know, he never had a little bit of dirt on him, make everything look so perfectly easy. But that was the mindset, is if we can equip people to be better DIYers, the more that they'll want to come and be a part of the store.
Right.
Man. And I think in the church world, we're looking at an opportunity where people desire significance. They want to be a part of something significant. And if we're trying to get them to come to us, that's one thing, be a part of what we're doing. But if our mindset changes and we said, how can we equip you to be more significant in your own community? It's a game changer. And engagement becomes kind of a byproduct of what we're looking for. But I think if I had to translate what you said, I would say that the old traditional model before digital, we would huddle on Sunday to get engagement during the week. And now what we're seeing is that we're focused on engagement during the week in order to get people to attend on Sunday. Is there a corollary there, would you say, with retail?
Yeah, we're not, your business model, if I were to refer it as a business model, is very one day focused. You know, but that's the other obvious opportunity with digital. it's a continuous. So the other thing that's just changing is you see, and it's not, people talk about the generational changes, but it's not generational. Everybody is doing the same thing. Everybody has the phone with them all the time. Everybody's looking at their iPad all the time. The opportunity for connection, the way to connect is, I mean, it doesn't stop. I mean, it's ongoing. And so that's another thing that I think is a big change. Certainly retailers understand it. I'm sure you all are seeing it. If this were just about Sunday, I think it's still an accelerant of growth, not a contraction. But it also allows it to be a lot more than about Sunday. I mean, I look at what people are doing on their mobile phones. I mean, what's the most popular app? I think one of the most popular apps in the whole Apple Store is Headspace, which is just somebody helping people meditate. That's odd. I mean, there are a lot better. I mean, not that meditation isn't great, but if you think of what people are looking for, if you think about what people are looking for on a daily basis, I just think it's an astonishing opportunity, an astonishing need, because we do want to draw closer together. We need physical contact. The COVID's showing us that. I mean, you think about all the important events in life. If I were again in your world, and I started with the understanding that every single important event in life, you're the centerpiece of, whether it's the baptism, the marriage, the funeral, the wedding, everything, you're the center. You should be the go-to place for meaning and centering in people's lives, and obviously spiritual growth.
I agree with that. I guess, I don't have this question prepared, but that's, what comes to mind is, there's in the retail world, there's all kinds of different metrics that you're looking at, right? So there's customer acquisition, retention. When you're looking at the traffic, I'm sure you're looking at how many people who viewed the website, bought something, what was the average first time purchase, some of those different things. But obviously customer retention and engaging people further is a lot cheaper than getting new customers. At the end of the day, to me, it seems like we need a new win, right? So attendance used to be the key metric because that's how we got people to one place to engage them further. So there's a change here happening with the digital platforms. Our win is different. Can you kind of walk us through what that is for Home Depot and how you guys thought through that?
Yeah, I think it really is engagement. And again, the beauty of digital is you can see, I put something up on my site, how much engagement do I get? Are people, how long are people staying? And then there's conversion. So you also look, okay, am I converting that? Am I converting that either in the store or am I converting that digitally? I think that there's, as I said, we built platforms for customers to talk to each other. The review function, I don't know what the equivalent of the review function is for the spiritual world, but probably one of the most important things about deepening the connection is I can see what others are saying. I don't know how you buy product, but if you're buying product online and you're buying your chandelier and you went online to research the chandelier, odds are you looked at a bunch of reviews.
Yes.
That's a community that was created of people looking at that chandelier and taking the time to say, hey, here are the great things about the chandelier. Here are the things that aren't so good. I would think there'd be direct analogies in the church world about how you deepen that experience, because you've got people in your congregation who've been through that experience. You've got people on your staff who really understand the experience and can cure. I mean, this is a very retail concept, but curate the experience, help the experience, pull out the things to learn from it. So it's the measurements in retail in the end are always sales. The measurement, I don't know how a church measures its health, but I assume it's some combination of attendance, connection, and giving.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that's always struck me as interesting, and I just apologize about these analogies, but if I were running a business of a church, and let's say for the sake of discussion, I went out, and this is, this is sort of very mercantile, so I apologize for it. But if I were running a church and I wanted to build an addition, and I'm going to call it a new choir room, I am pretty sure, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to go, yep, I can raise the $750,000 that it takes to build this addition. And I get it done. And I raise the $750,000 to build the addition. I don't need another building addition for 10 years, we'll say for the sake of discussion. What happens to that giving capacity over that 10 years? Why is it that the need, that generosity, and I am one who believes that generosity is reinforcing, why am I only pulling on the generosity of my congregants when I need to bump out a building? That latent desire to be generous and purposeful with your church is there whether you got a building or not.
Oh man, one of the best books I've ever read on generosity was not about generosity. It's called Free of Charge by Miroslav Volf. But he makes the argument that, at the end of the day, generosity is an identity issue. We're made in the image of the most generous, the only being who gives without asking anything in return. And we always think about generosity as asking something from people. But here's a crazy idea. What if worship, generosity, obedience, sacrifice were actually God's gift to us?
Right. No, exactly, Nathan.
Yeah. So we're innately generous, and people usually don't have a giving problem. They usually have a giving to my church problem, and it comes back to trust, because the only time we hear about money is when the church needs something, and then we assume all the other times they don't. Man, sorry, you stumbled into something big there. So our friends at Generous.
I'm just saying again, I look at this and I go, it's just curious to me that no one steps back and says, that $750,000 giving capacity, I mean, I'll say it's not an annual giving capacity, but it's a random, why am I tugging at that generosity need for that particular purpose versus, because I do happen to believe that it is self-reinforcing. People want to be generous. Yes. Teaching people how to be generous is one of the huge things that, the gospel tells us, that it's more blessed to give than receive.
Yes.
So,
well, let me ask you about that. So one of the people that we work with closely is a company that in its history has done a lot of episodic giving campaigns, very similar to what you're describing. And they're not going away from that necessarily, but they are pivoting towards more ongoing systemic forms of continued generosity and funding more vision than projects, if that makes sense.
Yes.
What were some things, because obviously you talk about customer retention, right? And you guys have done a great job with me, so I can say that. I mean, you stole me from Lowe's a couple years ago, and I enjoy it. But what are some of the things that you specifically focused on in order to create long-term? So if I don't buy something for 2 months, where does Home Depot step into my life? Kind of a question here. But how do you keep that relationship going?
Yeah. So first off, this is I happen to believe this is true for all retail. You'll go in and out of your need states and I'm sure that's true of your congregants.
Mhm.
There'll be times when, really whatever's happening in your life, the this nourishment of your soul may not be at the top. It should be, but it's not. Uh, the point of retail is that whenever your need state comes up, we want you to have the confidence that we're the absolute best place to go for filling that need. You'll be sure of the price, you'll be sure of your service, you'll be sure that we give you all the information that you need, and so on. I suspect it's kind of the same with the church world. People's level of connection will vary over time, but you have to be sure that you're there with, if I were to say, the meaningful offering at that right time. And it's hard to predict, right?
Well, it is hard to predict, but one thing I do know is people are either in or coming out of hardship.
Right.
And I believe as a Christian, the moments that you're not in hardship, it's your responsibility to enter into the hardship of others. And so what I hear you saying is we need to do a better job of either identifying the people who need care or identify the people who are able to care. And that's that's a big thought, Mr. Blake.
Well, there are lots of, there are a lot, as I say, I think the extraordinary thing and why I told, for those of you listening, I told Nathan when he called, I was thrilled because this is, I think, such a great topic because it's both important, it's just important as a matter of demographic fact that this is what the world is going to. I mean, we can all like it or not like it, but it's unstoppable because it is such a powerful experience. You know it for shopping. I'm sure the same is true in the church world. It's what you can do digitally is just so powerful. So reconciling or understanding how you connect the digital presence with your physical presence and how you get them to augment each other. I mean, I know when I was at Home Depot, that was the number one issue. How do we do that? And there are leadership questions. So I don't know your world, but I can tell you, when I was doing this at Depot, I looked at other retailers, brick and mortar retailers. And what the other brick and mortar retailers tended to do was they tended to find somebody who was young, who they didn't know particularly what to do with, and put her or him in charge of digital. And everybody in the organization said, well, they can't really care about this because they put her, him and her and whatever in charge of digital, and they're not resourcing it. They're not giving it a lot of money, and they're not putting the most important person on the staff in charge of it. And so the first thing I thought from a Home Depot context as we got serious about digital was, I'm going to put the most important executive in charge of this. And I am going to noticeably, I mean, just many factors, increase the budget. And because that's what gets people's attention. In the end, when the organization is looking at, hey, what's important? What's my boss think is important? That is set by who you put in charge of the effort and how much money you give her or him. Period, full stop. All the words in the world, if you don't put the right person, if you don't put the noticeably important person in charge of it, and if you don't resource it, everybody will know, well, that's interesting words, but they don't really mean it.
So Frank, you keep saying that you don't know much about our space, but everything you say would indicate that you know a lot about our space.
So then it's a universal truth. That's it, right? But everybody looks and they go, I know this. I know this person's, effectively on an ice floe. They didn't know what to do with them, or her. So they put them on the ice floe and they say, well, we'll see if it floats to land or if it melts, and that's life.
Well, and here's the reality, right? And by the way, to your point, literally in the book, we actually mentioned that this can't be an afterthought. That the idea is, if this is where we have the most people coming to us in the most possible or potential for engagement, We have to stop putting the bench on it and put our best campus pastor, our best person, and then resource them with whatever they need in order to create those systems and processes. But it is interesting, to your point, if we take what you learned 10 years ago and we fast forward to today, J. Crew, Nordstrom, not Nordstrom, excuse me. Is it Saks? Anyways,
there are a lot of bankruptcies.
A lot of bankruptcies.
A lot of folks didn't get it. Didn't get them.
But you look at Target, Home Depot.
Yeah.
I mean, and here's the crazy thing is not only are their sales through the roof digitally, and you would expect that because people have been quarantining, but you go to a Target and it's packed.
Right. Same with Depot.
Yeah. So it's, to your point, I just want to emphasize this, that putting your best people on that experience doesn't take away from your physical in-store engagement. It will drive physical in-store engagement.
Yeah.
And you've proven that with Home Depot, and you're seeing that with Target and some other retailers, but it's just amazing.
And it was also, this gets way too in the weeds, but it was interesting, the learnings from it, because one of the things we found early on was it was important that we connected these things from a measurement perspective. Mm-hmm. So it was hugely important that the store got credit for everything that happened online. So that if you were in the store and you referred somebody to an online experience, you weren't in effect, hurting yourself. Hmm. You need to set it up so that it is a joint success. The whole thing is about, what can you create putting these two things together, not in, setting them against each other.
Here's a question. When you were going through that process, this just popped in my head, but when you're going through this process, how much of a priority was put on creating the first customer engagement, and how much was it on, hey, we're Home Depot, we have a very large base, how do we get them to interact more? How did you allocate time and resources between kind of
I'm not sure I understand the question, Nathan.
How much time, and from a leadership perspective, did you spend on new customers and versus how do we get our customer base to engage more?
I'd say it's a pretty good balance. I believe that before you create a great experience for new customers, so we'd have people who would say, these are what the people who don't shop at Home Depot are looking for. And I would go, well, that's great, and we got to get there, but tell me all the needs of the people who do shop at Home Depot that we're not meeting. Because isn't that our first priority? Because they're already here and they're frustrated. So before I go and put all my resources on bringing in new people, I want to fix the frustrations of the people that are already loyal to me. So that's, different people could argue that, but I think you gotta, unless you don't have frustrated people, but we had lots of frustrated people.
I would say that we have disconnected people. To your point earlier, we have more people who watch online than actually engage. And I think that was why I was asking the question is, there was always that 80-20 rule where 20% of your people give 80%, but with digital, you have far more consumerism. So now it's more like a 97-3 rule.
Right.
And, it's more that you have more people who aren't engaged watching.
Right. And that's your digitized flyer. I mean, that ought to be just alarm bells going off at every level. I mean, that would worry me. That would worry me. I mean, I'd be going, wrong content. I mean, sorry, I'm sure the content is great. But a deeper thought about the content and how it connects with people so that you keep it from just being a TV show.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Well, listen, we're actually, you and I could probably talk for another 3 hours.
Yeah.
We promised the group that we would allow for some questions, but just before we do that, and by the way, if you have questions, please go ahead, type those into the Q&A box, and we'll get to those. But I would be remiss if I didn't pose this last question to you. Let's say we get the 10 most influential churches in the country in a room, and we give you the keys for the next year. What are you working on?
I know, I mean, you know, you've just hit my hot button is, and I think I mentioned this to you, Nathan. So I had a discussion once with the person who founded Nextdoor, and I don't know how many of the folks on the call know Nextdoor or use Nextdoor, but on the product journey that he was laying out was ultimately, if you think about neighborhoods and how neighborhoods should work, that neighborhoods should be, you ought to be getting help from your neighbors. That ought to be a source of support for you. And that's Nextdoor. That's a commercial digital platform. As I said earlier, to me, I think the nearest in concentric circle, if I had all those churches, would be my community of faith. And I'm no student of the Bible, but it's my sense of what the early church was very much a group that was self-supporting and, you know, reaching out and taking care of each other. I would want that to be available. I would want the church saying, these platforms that now people are engaging in are fundamentally corrosive platforms. We want a nurturing, edifying, soul-developing platform. And that's our mission. And here's what we're doing. And I, as a congregant, I would, if somebody said, I belong to blank church, and in this church, all the members of the congregation can help fill the needs of those who are physically or digitally connected to them, I'd be thrilled. That would have the first pull on my generosity dollar.
Okay, well, we might have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how cool would that be? How cool would that be?
It would be amazing. And it would take churches also being okay with working together and trying to serve the city together versus, because everything still is about come to me. And I think the church has to get outside the wall. Somebody very smart at Buckhead Church, our friends, a guy named John Hambrick said this to me. He said, the attractional church built its model or its prominence on creating a community of insiders with an influence on outsiders. And the relevant church of today will simply create community between insiders and outsiders. And I think that's
well said.
Yeah.
That's well said. But I do apologize, as I started with. I'm hesitant to give any advice because I think I work from odd analogies.
Well, honestly, it's more relevant than you know. And I think, honestly, friend, there's a C.S. Lewis quote that said, we are called to have the faith of a child, but also the brain of an adult. And I think that practical executive mind, if we could tap into the potential of the resources we have, the impact that we could have on America today, joining together as a church is especially with this moment, is just, it's unbelievable.
Completely.
All right. Sorry. So Howard Atkinson, if you were leading a church organization, and we'll pretend that you are an expert in this area, what would you be measuring? And I know you've touched on this a little bit from an engagement standpoint, but it sounds like, well, let me just leave it to you. But what are some of the key metrics that you would be evaluating?
So I assume the basic metrics are already measured. You've got how many people come to your site, how many people click on the message. And then I can tell you how we would do it in retail. You'd have a heat map of the site and you'd say, okay, if I look at the heat map on my site, where are people going? And then, you know, you put whatever colors you want, but I'll make it green for where they're going and red for where they're not going. And you'd go, all right, am I comfortable with this map? Or do I have all bright green on the message and then everything else is red? And if everything else is red, or the things that are red are things that, you know, make you uncomfortable, how do you start pulling people from your green to your red? And, you know, I don't want to give specific advice where I don't know the specific problem, but it's just a mindset. I mean, these are all problems that can be solved. You know, but it takes coordination and linkage. So it's, you know, how do you get the message that's in the green thing? How do you get that message over to reference the red thing where you want them going? How do you pull something that's happening in the red thing into your green box to show it to the people who are looking at the green? I mean, these are basic, it's basic. I know where people are. I know where they aren't. I got to figure out how I communicate between those two boxes. And sometimes it's a bad offering that makes it red. Sometimes it's bad visibility, you know, lots of different answers, but it's a whole thought process that says, this is how my site, I want it to look.
Yeah. Well, sometimes bad messaging, right? We don't do a great job of leading people into what we're actually trying to tell them too.
If your site, I mean, I'm sure they do this. I'm sure you guys do this. If your site is all green in one space and all red everywhere else, it's like every other problem. You start, all right, but that's what you'd be measuring. You're measuring, you got great engagement here, I assume, the green spot, whatever the green spot is, and how do you spread it more broadly across your page? Because that represents activities, right? It represents engagement. You need the people understanding more what you have to offer. And frankly, I'm probably too much of an introvert on this stuff, but frankly, you got more opportunity to get people engaged digitally and then into the physical world than you do the other way around. When I'm physically in the church and somebody says, I've got a, you know, blank group, whatever the heck blank group is, mm-hmm. Odds are when I'm in there on a Sunday, I've got my little routine down. Mm-hmm. And my little routine is I go, I sit down, I listen, I sing, I leave. And I'm, you know, thinking about where my car is. That's my routine. If you give me space and a different time, and I can see, oh, they've got this group over here. You know, I knew that they had this, but this is a very anonymous, low risk way for me to check it out. You should be getting more engagement digitally than you get physically, at least for the people like me. There are other people who would be thrilled wandering the halls, seeing what's there, but I think there are a lot of people like me.
No, there are. And I have a 5 and a 3-year-old. And I mean, honestly, you know, Sunday morning is boy, it's interesting, right? Right. So, and you know, the church is trying to turn over services. And so one of the things that we've said too is our buildings, once we get people there, have to become as relevant as they are reverent. We have to actually start catering to families in different and more unique ways than we've done. Would you say this? I think, because he's asking, so how, you know, Howard's asking this question, what would you do? Doesn't a lot of that depend on the organization's mission and who they're trying to reach? Like, would you say it's more about using data to quantify the things that you wish to qualify? If we say that we're about these things, we should be using data to evaluate and measure how we're interacting with people on those core missional values.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, the heat map is just a way of presenting data. It's just a way of putting the geography of your data. And then you go, what do I want? What do I want? Your mission's going to be, I don't know what the mission is, but I know I know that I have an opportunity in a very easy way of looking and saying, this is working and this isn't.
Yes.
And I should then be about fixing the thing that's not working.
Yes.
I wish I could make it more complex, but
no, I love the simplicity behind it, Frank. Honestly, it is just simply about measuring the results that you wish to achieve in retail. And for us, it's literally about measuring our purpose, our existence. Right. If we exist to connect people to God and to one another, how well are we doing at those two things, and what metrics are going to help us inform those questions, right? So, all right, sorry. Next question, Corey. How can we help people go from simply watching to engaging with our community online? What are some practical steps, Frank, that you...
So we didn't have that issue, right? So we didn't have videos of me talking, so I didn't have to worry about that. But here's, so this is, I'm straying completely into a land that I know nothing about.
Okay.
But I'll make it up. And I'm going to say, I got a lot of people coming and listening to the message, but I'm going to pretend that there's another box over here that's red. And I'm going to just make it up for the sake of discussion. My marriage box is red. For whatever reason, no one is interacting. I'm sure this is not true. I'm just making it up. No one's interacting with my church pre-marital counseling box. Okay. And for whatever reason, I've said this is important. I need more people engaging in that. The very first question I'd ask is, what are the references back and forth? So how does the thing that people go to, the green box, the sermon, how does that reference or not reference the premarital counseling? How does the premarital counseling leverage off of the thing that's green? And in my mind, I mean, they're clever people think of better things than I will think of, but I'd start with, gee, I'd have a couple. I'd include a couple in a message that had been in premarital counseling and have them talk about it. Here's what it did for me. This is why this is so important. I mean, you're just linking communications. I mean, you don't have the ability we have in retail of saying special, 50% off premarital counseling to draw them to that box.
That's right.
But you do have a lot of people who give you complete trust and a lot of powerful stories. If it were me, I'd have a little map, and here's how I want to touch around my site's a map, my offerings are a map. How do I get people to the right geographies is part of my job.
Man, that's so good. Yeah, I mean, you start with the behavior you want to see. Right. You communicate stories to reward that behavior, and you literally communicate. I mean, it's so simple. I mean, it really is so simple.
Right. You know, and you tell such compelling stories. I mean, that's the brilliant thing about the church is I actually care. You know, this is actually I see somebody compelling on the stage. Just the power of the pastor saying, it's what are you recognizing? I'm recognizing this young couple that's gone through premarital counseling. That'll get my attention. Might get me talking to my son who's about to get married. Hey, have you thought about doing this?
Well, it's so interesting too, to go back from a very practical standpoint. Again, one of the challenges we have as a church is we try to pack all of our communication into one program. And the thing, I think at the end of the day, and I hear you saying this too, is that we end up, one of the analogies that we've used a few times, Apple has built all of its marketing around culture, experience, connectedness. It's not about buying iPhones.
Right.
But do you know who cares about how many iPhones get sold? the stock owners, the investors.
Right.
But what if Apple were to change its marketing? All of a sudden, it started telling its customers how many Apple phones or iPhones it sold.
Right.
But we
Right.
sit in front of the congregation and we say 4 people got baptized last week. We had 6 new time giving units. They don't care. That's our language, you know. What they want to hear is, how can you be a part of making me significant in my community?
Right.
People who care about how many Apple or how many baptisms happen, that's a whole different group that's already getting to the church. Would you agree with that statement?
I totally agree. Totally agree.
All right. We're technically out of time. I feel bad because I got excited and talked way too much. So.
No, your comments are great. As I said when we first talked, I think this is just one of the most profoundly important topics.
Okay. Well, I'll say this. I wasn't able, guys, I'm sorry. Wasn't able to get to all the questions. What I'd love to do is do our best at following up with you. So anybody, if you did ask a question, we'll do our best to get those questions answered for you in writing. Jan, I think you had a slide you're going to put up, but Frank, I think I told you this, but I want to end with this, if it's okay. The reason I'm actually so passionate about this subject is that I became a Christian not only at Buckhead Church, where you attend, but my story follows everything that you're talking about. So my 20s, I swore I'd never step foot inside of a church. Just had a horrible church experience, and a mentor of mine gave me this video series from this guy named Stan Anley or Andy Stanley or something like that. And so, I watched a few of these messages and I'm like, wow, just unbelievably practical. Like I can get into this. And my next step though was a community group. Somebody reached out and said, hey, we're doing this thing where we talk about the Bible in Andy's sermons. Okay, I'll try it. But I actually became a Christian before I ever stepped foot inside a Buckhead Church.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more people like me that are trying out the church from a digital standpoint. And so, you mentioned so many times today that you aren't familiar with our space, but honestly, I think that this really is one of the most relevant conversations from one of the best leaders that we know in this space. I mean, so I am beyond grateful for the time that you've spent with us today. Just thank you.
No, it's a privilege. It's great. And thank everybody for listening, and thank you for what you do, because that's it's an amazing dedication of your life to such an important endeavor. So thank you.
All right. Thanks. We'll be in touch soon.
Yep.